My family told the school I was studying abroad, but kept me locked in the attic as punishment for my twin sister's crimes. The day everything changed, I was packing for what I thought was a semester in France. My acceptance letter to the exchange program sat on my desk, already framed by Mom. She'd been so proud, telling everyone at church about her daughter studying art history in Paris. The pastor had mentioned it in announcements. My art teacher, Mrs. Nguyen, had written glowing recommendation letters. I'd spent months preparing, studying French phrases, researching the program's partner school in Lyon. My suitcase lay open on my bed, half filled with carefully folded clothes suitable for European autumn weather. I'd made lists, checked them twice, imagined myself walking cobblestone streets and sketching in museums. But when I came home from my final day of junior year, everything was wrong. The attic door stood open, something I'd never seen before. My suitcase was gone. Dad stood at the bottom of the attic stairs holding a clear plastic evidence bag with Sophia's name on it. "You're not going anywhere," he said. His voice was flat, final, carrying none of the warmth that had characterized our relationship for 16 years. Inside the bag were items that made my stomach drop. Stolen credit cards, at least a dozen, each with different names. Fake IDs showing Sophia's face with various aliases. A burner phone with texts discussing meeting times and drop locations. Bank statements for accounts I'd never heard of. Most damning was a small notebook with handwritten records of transactions, dates, locations, amounts stolen. All in Sophia's handwriting, distinct from mine in the way she crossed her T's and looped her Y's. But the security footage the police had shown our parents, footage from a jewelry store robbery in May, showed someone who could have been either of us. Same height, same build, same dark hair cut to identical length. The cameras had caught the angle wrong, showing profile instead of full face. Without clear facial identification, the police couldn't definitively say which twin had walked out with $18,000 in diamonds. Mom appeared behind Dad, her face harder than I'd ever seen it. "The school thinks you left for France this morning. We drove you to the airport, watched you go through security, waved goodbye. That story doesn't change. You stay up there until Sophia's situation is resolved. Until we know you won't destroy this family by talking to police or investigators or anyone who might ask questions." I tried to argue, words tumbling out in panicked explanation. I hadn't done anything. I'd been at school all day when that robbery happened. Dozens of witnesses could confirm it. I'd never stolen anything, never even gotten a speeding ticket. Sophia was the one with the criminal friends, the one who'd been coming home late with expensive things she couldn't explain. But Dad grabbed my arm, his grip painful, and physically pushed me toward the attic stairs. I stumbled, caught myself on the railing, looked back at Mom hoping for intervention. She turned away, wouldn't meet my eyes. The attic stairs were narrow and steep, meant for occasional access to storage, not regular use. Dad pushed me up them, his hand between my shoulder blades, propelling me forward. At the top, the space was unfinished. Exposed wooden beams crossed the ceiling. Pink insulation showed between wall studs. The plywood floor was dusty, scattered with Christmas boxes and old furniture. A twin mattress lay in the corner with a sleeping bag spread across it. A plastic bucket sat near the mattress. One small window looked out over the backyard, but I could see wire mesh had been fastened over the outside. The window itself was painted shut, white paint sealing the frame closed. Dad pointed to the corner where supplies were stacked. "Water bottles, protein bars, enough for a few days. You'll get regular meals. The bucket is your bathroom until we figure out something better." His voice was matter-of-fact, like he was explaining household chores. "This isn't punishment, Ainsley. This is protection. If police come asking questions about Sophia, having you verifiably out of the country makes everything simpler. But you ruined that by being too accessible, too available. So until the investigation resolves, you stay here where you can't complicate things." I started to respond, but he was already descending the stairs. The door at the bottom closed with a heavy thud. I heard the distinct sound of a deadbolt sliding into place, metal scraping metal, then Dad's footsteps retreating. I stood frozen in the attic, surrounded by the detritus of family Christmases past, processing that my father had just installed a lock on the attic door that very morning while I'd been at school saying goodbye to friends and teachers, hugging Mrs. Nguyen and promising to send postcards from Paris. He'd planned this. They'd both planned this. While I'd been excited about my future, they'd been preparing my prison. That first night was the worst. I screamed until my throat was raw and my voice gave out completely, pounded on the door until my fists bruised purple and my knuckles split, kicked at the walls until my feet ached. Nobody came. The house below stayed completely silent, as if I didn't exist, as if my screams couldn't penetrate the floorboards and insulation. Around midnight, I heard footsteps on the stairs. The door opened just wide enough for a tray to slide through. A sandwich wrapped in plastic, an apple, a bottle of water. Then the door closed and locked again. No words, No acknowledgement of my pleas. I stared at the food, part of me wanting to refuse it in protest, but thirst won out. I drank the entire water bottle in desperate gulps. The attic was hot, the June evening heat trapped under the roof making the temperature unbearable. I'd stripped down to shorts and a tank top but still sweated through everything. The small window provided no ventilation. I tried to open it, pulling at the frame with all my strength, but the paint had sealed it completely shut. Even if I could break the glass, the wire mesh outside would prevent escape. I didn't sleep that first night, just sat against the wall staring at shadows, trying to make sense of what had happened. My brain kept circling back to the same impossible facts. My parents had chosen Sophia over me, had literally locked me in an attic to protect her from consequences of her own crimes. The exchange program I'd worked toward for 2 years was starting without me. My spot on the plane to Paris had been filled by an alternate. Somewhere in France, a host family was expecting an American student who would never arrive. Mrs. Nguyen thought I was pursuing the opportunity she'd helped me earn. My friends thought I was living my dream. Everyone thought I was somewhere beautiful and exciting while I was actually trapped in an attic becoming my prison. The unfairness of it burned worse than the physical discomfort. When morning light filtered through the small window, I cataloged my situation more carefully. The attic ran the length of the house, maybe 40 feet long by 20 feet wide. The ceiling peaked in the center where I could stand upright, but sloped down on either side to maybe 4 feet of headroom. Boxes of Christmas decorations filled one section. Old furniture draped in sheets occupied another area. A broken desk, chairs with missing legs, lamps that no longer worked. The mattress in the corner was the only intentional accommodation. The second day established a pattern that would define my imprisonment. Food appeared twice daily, breakfast around 8 and dinner around 6. A tray would slide under the door with simple meals, cereal and milk in the morning, sandwiches or leftovers at night, always a bottle of water. Never anything that required utensils, nothing that could potentially be used as a tool or weapon. I tried to talk to whoever brought the food, calling out questions and pleas, but they never responded. Just slid the tray through, collected the empty one from the previous meal, and left. I couldn't even tell if it was Mom or Dad making the deliveries. The footsteps sounded the same, heavy on the attic stairs. I started marking days on the wall using pencil I'd found in a Christmas decoration box. Tiny tally marks, 5 days making a group, crossing through to mark weeks. The physical act of recording time passing felt important, concrete proof that this was real and ongoing. Without it, the days blurred together into an endless present tense. The heat was oppressive. June in Maryland meant temperatures in the 90s, and the attic amplified everything. The space became an oven by midday, trapping heat under the roof. I spent hours lying on the plywood floor, the coolest surface available, trying not to move and generate more body heat. By the end of the first week, I'd developed a routine born of necessity. Wake when sunlight hit the window, drink water to rehydrate from night sweats, eat whatever breakfast arrived. Spend the morning doing exercises, push-ups and sit-ups and lunges, anything to keep muscles from atrophying. The physical exertion was torture in the heat but felt necessary, maintaining strength for an escape opportunity that might never come. Afternoons I spent at the window, watching the world continue without me. The Kowalski family 3 houses down had pool parties visible over their fence, kids splashing and laughing while I sweltered in the attic. Mrs. Chen next door maintained her garden, weeding flower beds and trimming hedges. Normal suburban summer activities happening while I was imprisoned 15 feet above my own front yard. I tried to signal through the window, waving, pressing my face against the glass, anything to be seen. But the angle was wrong. People looked at houses, not up at attic windows. The wire mesh covering made it even harder to be visible from outside. I looked like shadows, or maybe old curtains, not a person begging for help. The psychological torture was worse than the physical discomfort. I could hear life continuing below me through the floorboards, television shows playing, their dialogue muffled but recognizable. Phone conversations, Mom's voice talking to friends or relatives, making plans, laughing. Dad's footsteps following his morning routine, bedroom to bathroom to kitchen to garage. The sounds of coffee brewing, dishes clattering, the garage door opening as he left for work. Normal family sounds that excluded me completely. And Sophia's voice, high and cheerful, talking about college applications and summer plans. My twin sister, my identical mirror, living the life I should be living while I rotted directly above her. We'd been close once, before high school fractured our relationship. Shared a room until we were 12, shared clothes and friends and interests. Then Sophia discovered a crowd that thought rules were optional, started staying out late, coming home smelling like marijuana and alcohol. Our parents had dismissed my concerns, said Sophia was just exploring her independence, that I was being judgmental. Now I understood they'd been in denial, unable to see their golden child becoming someone capable of multiple felonies. The bucket situation was dehumanizing beyond anything I could have imagined. For the first few days, I used it sparingly, trying to minimize the indignity. But necessity eventually overrode shame. Once a week, Dad would come up to empty it, wearing a mask like the smell was the worst part of what he was doing. He'd bring a replacement bucket, take the full one without making eye contact, and leave without speaking. The entire transaction took less than 2 minutes. I tried to talk to him during these visits, reasoning and pleading. Dad, this is illegal. You're committing a crime by keeping me here. I didn't do anything wrong. Sophia's the one who should face consequences. He never responded, just completed his task and left. Mom never came up at all. I'd hear her voice sometimes when she was directly below, talking on the phone or watching TV, but she never climbed those stairs. Her avoidance felt like judgment, as if I'd done something to deserve this. As if protecting Sophia required sacrificing me, and that was somehow acceptable. The casual cruelty of their choices was harder to process than the imprisonment itself. Summer stretched endlessly. July brought even worse heat, temperatures over 100 degrees outside, meaning the attic felt like a convection oven. I developed heat rash across my back and shoulders. My hair fell out in clumps from stress and nutritional deficiency. The food they provided was adequate for survival but not nutrition. Carbs and protein but minimal vegetables or fruit. An apple here, a banana there. Never enough. I felt my body weakening, muscles softening despite the exercises, energy depleting. Sleep became difficult. The heat made rest nearly impossible, and stress manifested in nightmares when I finally did sleep. Dreams of being buried alive, trapped in smaller and smaller spaces, unable to breathe. I'd wake gasping, disoriented in the darkness, taking minutes to remember where I was and why. One particularly bad night, I had a panic attack so severe I thought I was dying. Heart racing, chest tight, unable to catch my breath. I banged on the floor, screaming for help, and nobody came. The panic eventually passed, leaving me exhausted and more alone than ever. The newspaper clippings started appearing with my food trays in early August. Dad's way of explaining why my imprisonment had to continue. The first article was from a Baltimore paper, headline reading, "Multi-County Crime Spree Linked to Local Teen." The story detailed robberies across 3 counties spanning 6 months. Jewelry stores, high-end boutiques, electronics retailers. The pattern was sophisticated. Fake identities used to open credit cards. Stolen cards used to purchase merchandise later sold through online marketplaces. The total dollar amount exceeded $200,000. The article included security footage stills, grainy images of a dark-haired girl entering stores, leaving with merchandise. The photos could have been Sophia or could have been me. We were truly identical, had been fooling teachers and friends our whole lives by switching places. But I'd never used our similarity for anything criminal. Sophia apparently had no such compunctions. Subsequent articles detailed the investigation. Police had identified a suspect but needed more evidence. DNA from one crime scene was being processed. Fingerprints had been found on some stolen credit cards. The investigation was ongoing. Witnesses were being interviewed. One article mentioned our family by name, describing us as a well-respected suburban family shocked by the allegations. It quoted my father saying his daughters were good kids, that there must be some misunderstanding. He mentioned my exchange program, noting I was studying abroad and unreachable for comment. The casual lie in print made me nauseous. People reading that article would think I was in France, that my family was normal, that my absence was legitimate. Nobody would think to question why a teenage girl studying abroad had gone completely silent. Another article detailed the security footage more thoroughly. The cameras at the jewelry store had caught a girl matching mine and Sophia's description during the May robbery. She'd worn sunglasses and a hat, but distinctive jewelry was visible. A silver bracelet with charms. I'd recognized it immediately when I saw the photo. Sophia's bracelet, a birthday gift from our grandmother. But when questioned, Sophia had claimed the bracelet was mine, that I'd borrowed it before leaving for France. Her story was that I was the criminal, that I'd committed all these crimes and fled the country before police could investigate. The accusation hit me like a physical blow when I read it in an article Dad included with my dinner tray. Sophia was claiming I'd framed her, that I'd used our identical appearance to commit crimes she'd be blamed for, that I'd left the country to avoid justice. The article noted police were attempting to contact me through the exchange program for questioning. School administrators had been cooperative, providing my contact information in France. But according to the article, I wasn't responding to emails or calls. The school reported I'd been difficult to reach, traveling extensively, deeply immersed in studies. My parents had apparently told school administrators I was taking the opportunity seriously, not checking American communications regularly. The excuse was plausible enough that nobody was alarmed yet. Study abroad students often went dark for weeks at a time. But the article noted that if I didn't respond soon, authorities would coordinate with French police to locate and question me, which of course would reveal I'd never left the United States, would expose my parents' lies and potentially implicate me in Sophia's crimes. August became September. I watched through my window as neighbors' kids returned to school. Buses picked up children at the corner. Cars dropped teenagers at the high school 2 miles away. My friends were starting junior year without me. Sophia was starting her senior year. I heard her through the floorboards complaining about homework, talking on the phone about college applications. She'd been accepted for early decision to Penn State, was planning her future while mine evaporated. The injustice burned constantly in my chest. She'd committed the crimes. She'd made choices that hurt people. But I was the one locked in an attic losing weight and sanity while she enjoyed senior year activities. I tried to feel anger toward her, but mostly felt bewilderment. How had my twin sister, the person I'd shared a womb with, become someone capable of not just crimes, but also of letting me take the punishment? Did she think about me at all? Did she feel guilt? Or had she rationalized this as somehow justified? The breaking point came in mid-September when I overheard a conversation that changed everything. Dad was on the phone in his office, directly below the attic. His voice carried clearly through a heating vent. The police have identified Sophia as a person of interest. They want to bring her in for formal questioning. The DNA evidence from the jewelry store is being compared to samples from the school physical we provided. He paused, listening. Yes, I understand the implications. If it matches Sophia definitively, the France story doesn't protect her anymore. Another pause. My concern is what happens if they get a warrant to search the house. We'd have to move Ainsley somewhere else. A hotel maybe, or the cabin upstate. The casual way he discussed relocating me, as if I were contraband to be hidden, made me understand something fundamental. This wasn't temporary. They weren't planning to release me once Sophia's legal situation resolved. They were planning indefinite imprisonment. As long as I could potentially contradict their lies or complicate their defense of Sophia, I was a liability. Better for me to stay disappeared permanently. That realization transformed my approach. Until then, I'd been waiting, hoping, trusting that eventually they'd see reason and let me go. Now I understood that hope was dangerous. I needed to save myself because nobody else would. I started examining the attic systematically, looking for weaknesses I could exploit. The door was solid, the lock heavy-duty, but the floorboards were old. In one corner, near where Christmas boxes were stacked, several boards felt loose when I stepped on them. I began working on those boards during the day when the house was noisiest, when Dad was at work and Mom was running errands or watching television. I'd use a piece of metal coat hanger I'd found in a Christmas box to pry at the boards, lifting them slightly, loosening the nails that held them down. The work was slow and silent. 10 minutes of prying, then stopping to listen for footsteps, then continuing. Over days, I created enough give that I could lift one board completely, revealing the gap between attic floor and second floor ceiling below. The space was maybe 18 inches high, filled with insulation and darkness. But it was a potential route to freedom. I spent days mapping the house's layout from memory, trying to remember where ceiling access panels might be. There was one in the hallway linen closet, I was certain. Dad had used it once to access wiring. If I could navigate the crawl space to that location, I could potentially drop down into the second floor. From there, I'd have to avoid detection long enough to get out of the house. It was a desperate plan with multiple points of failure. But it was better than waiting for my parents to decide moving me to a more secure location was necessary. I prepared carefully. Set aside extra water bottles and protein bars, resources for after escape. Practiced moving quietly, learning which floorboards creaked. Timed my parents' routines, noting when the house was most empty. Dad left for work at 7:30 each morning. Mom usually went grocery shopping on Monday mornings, was gone for at least 2 hours. That would be my window. 2 hours to escape, get help, expose what they'd done. But before I could execute the plan, everything escalated. I heard shouting downstairs one evening, voices rising in anger, Sophia screaming at our parents. "I'm not taking a plea deal. You told me this would be handled. You said Ainsley being gone would fix everything." Mom's response was too muffled to understand, but equally angry. Dad's voice joined in, louder. More crashes, things breaking. Then Sophia's voice again, shrieking. "Fine! If I'm going down, I'm telling them the truth about everything. About where Ainsley really is. About what you did to protect me." Silence fell suddenly, ominous and heavy. Then footsteps pounding, doors slamming, a car starting, tires squealing as someone left. The house settled into quiet that felt different, charged with some new tension. Hours later, long after dark, footsteps came up to the attic. The lock clicked. The door opened. Dad entered for the first time since establishing this prison months ago. His face looked haggard, aged years in those months. Gray had spread through his hair, lines creased his forehead. "Sophia's been arrested," he said without preamble. His voice was flat, defeated. DNA match to the jewelry store was definitive. They're charging her with 12 counts of theft, fraud, and identity theft. The DA is offering a plea deal, 5 years with possibility of parole after 3. He sat down on the Christmas boxes, suddenly looking exhausted. She's refusing the deal, says she didn't do it, that you did, that we sent you to France to hide you from prosecution. I waited, saying nothing. She told the police about you being up here, claimed we locked you away to prevent you from confessing and clearing her name. They didn't believe her. Thought it was a desperate accusation from someone facing serious charges. But they're going to follow up, try to verify your location in France. They'll contact the school, the exchange program, possibly French authorities. He looked at me directly for the first time. We need you to stay quiet. If you surface now and contradict Sophia's story, it makes our whole family look like liars and criminals. Better they think you're in France and unreachable. Better you stay disappeared. I found my voice. It came out raspy from disuse. You're asking me to stay in this attic indefinitely? While Sophia faces trial? While I'm supposed to be living my life? Dad's jaw tightened. I'm asking you to understand that family loyalty requires sacrifice. Yes, Sophia made mistakes, bad ones, but she's still your sister, still our daughter. We can't abandon her. I laughed, a harsh sound. But you can abandon me? Lock me in an attic for months? Steal my future to protect hers? He stood abruptly. You don't understand the complexity of the situation. If you come forward now, police will question everything. Your credibility will be destroyed. They might even charge you as an accomplice or believe Sophia's version that you're the real criminal. Better to stay hidden until this all settles. Then we'll figure something out. Before I could respond, he left, locked the door, descended the stairs. I stood alone processing what he'd said. The threats were veiled but clear. Coming forward meant potential criminal charges based on Sophia's lies. Staying hidden meant continued imprisonment. They'd trapped me perfectly in a situation with no good options. The newspaper articles came more frequently after that. Sophia's arrest made local news. Prominent family's daughter arrested in crime spree. The article detailed her charges, mentioned her twin sister studying abroad, noted police efforts to contact me for questioning. Our school's principal was quoted expressing shock. Mrs. Nguyen was quoted saying she'd been trying to reach me for months, had been worried about the communication gap. The article explained I was apparently traveling extensively in France, difficult to contact, but that authorities were working through diplomatic channels to arrange an interview. Another article explored Sophia's defense strategy. Her lawyer was arguing mistaken identity, claiming that the real criminal was her twin sister who'd fled to France before the investigation began. The defense presented Sophia as a victim of her sister's crimes, an innocent girl being scapegoated. The prosecution called this a transparent attempt to shift blame. They had DNA evidence, fingerprints, and security footage. The trial would determine the truth. But the public nature of the accusation meant I was now a person of interest even from France. If I surfaced, I'd face immediate investigation. I continued working on my escape route. The gap in the floorboards was now large enough for me to fit through. I'd practiced lowering myself into the crawl space, getting comfortable with the darkness and tight quarters. The space between floors was claustrophobic, filled with insulation that irritated my skin and lungs. But I'd mapped a route to the linen closet access panel, knew approximately how far I'd need to crawl and in which direction. The plan solidified around Thanksgiving. Mom's sister in Philadelphia was getting married over Thanksgiving weekend. Both parents would attend, would be gone Thursday through Sunday. Sophia was living with her lawyer's family, a condition of her bail. The house would be empty for 4 days. It was perfect timing. I'd have multiple days to escape, get help, and ensure I was safely in protective custody before they returned. I'd overheard them discussing the trip, heard Mom worrying about leaving me alone that long. Dad's response was clinical. She's been fine for 5 months. Another 4 days won't matter. We'll leave extra food and water. They departed early Thursday morning. I watched through my window as they loaded suitcases into the car, backed the small overnight bags suggesting they really planned to be gone multiple days. The car pulled out of the driveway at 6:30 in the morning. I waited an hour, ensuring they hadn't forgotten anything and wouldn't turn back. Then I went to work. The floorboards lifted easily now after weeks of preparation. I'd loosened all the nails, created a gap large enough to squeeze through. I lowered myself feet first into the darkness, felt my toes touch a ceiling beam, transferred my weight carefully. The space between floors was exactly as terrible as I'd imagined. Almost no room to move, insulation everywhere touching my exposed skin, complete darkness. I'd brought a small flashlight I'd found in a Christmas box, but its battery was weak. The beam barely illuminated a few feet ahead. I crawled horizontally across ceiling beams, moving inches at a time, navigating by memory and hope toward where I thought the linen closet should be. The insulation irritated every exposed inch of skin. Dust filled my lungs, making breathing difficult. I had to stop frequently, fighting panic, reminding myself this was freedom ahead. After what felt like hours but was probably 45 minutes, my hand found what I'd been searching for. A square panel, maybe 2 feet by 2 feet. I pushed up against it, felt it lift slightly. Not locked or sealed, just resting in place. I pushed harder. It moved up and aside, revealing light from below. I pulled myself up through the opening into the linen closet on the second floor, emerging into a space that felt massive after the crawl space. My legs buckled when I tried to stand. 5 months of limited movement had atrophied muscles more than I'd realized. I gripped the shelving for support, waited for the dizziness to pass, then opened the closet door. The hallway looked exactly as I remembered, but also foreign, like a place from a dream. I'd watched this space through security footage for months, but hadn't physically stood here since June. Sophia's bedroom door was closed. My old bedroom door stood open, the room converted to Mom's craft space, all evidence of my existence removed. The bathroom door was ajar. Everything looked normal, peaceful, maintained, as if one member of the family wasn't imprisoned in the attic above. I walked slowly down the stairs, gripping the banister, legs trembling. Each step felt monumental. At the bottom, I paused. The living room stretched to my right, kitchen straight ahead, front door to my left. Freedom was 15 feet away. Just walk out the door, and this nightmare ended. But my legs gave out completely. 5 months of malnutrition and confinement had destroyed more than I'd realized. I collapsed on the bottom step, unable to go further. Sat there crying from frustration and relief. I'd escaped the attic but couldn't physically make it out of the house. After several minutes, I tried again, used furniture to pull myself up, shuffle forward, make progress toward the door. Made it to the living room couch, collapsed again. My reflection in the TV screen shocked me. Gaunt face, sunken eyes, hair thin and patchy. I'd lost probably 30 pounds, looked more like a cancer patient than a healthy teenager. The person in that reflection was a stranger, a ghost of who I'd been. It took nearly an hour to reach the front door. I'd crawl a few feet, rest, continue. Finally, I turned the deadbolt, gripped the handle, pulled it open. Sunlight flooded in, blinding after months of dim attic light. The fresh air felt like water after dying of thirst. I dragged myself over the threshold, collapsed on the front porch, made it down the porch steps one at a time, pulling myself along. Reached the front lawn and couldn't go further, just lay there in the grass, breathing open air, feeling sun on my skin. Mrs. Chen found me there. She was bringing in her mail, looked up, saw me collapsed on our lawn. She dropped her mail, ran over. Ainsley? Oh my God, Ainsley. She recognized me despite the changes. Aren't you in France? What happened to you? I tried to speak but couldn't form words. Just cried while she pulled out her phone, called 911, gave our address, explained she'd found a teenager collapsed on the lawn, looked severely malnourished and in medical distress. The ambulance arrived within minutes. Paramedics loaded me onto a stretcher, started an IV, asked questions I couldn't answer coherently. Mrs. Chen rode with me to the hospital, holding my hand, telling me I was safe now. The ER doctors were horrified by my condition. Severe malnutrition, dehydration, vitamin deficiencies, muscle atrophy. They admitted me immediately, started aggressive treatment. Police arrived while I was being examined. A detective named Sandra Wallace introduced herself, explained she was investigating a report of possible child abuse. Mrs. Chen had told 911 about finding me, about the family claiming I was in France. That discrepancy triggered immediate investigation. I told her everything. Words tumbling out in fragmented sentences about the attic, the food trays, the bucket, the months of isolation, about Sophia's crimes and my parents' choice to imprison me rather than let me complicate their defense, about the newspaper articles and the lies to my school and the systematic erasure of my existence. Detective Wallace recorded everything, her expression growing darker with each detail. We need to verify this immediately. Can you consent to officers checking the attic? I agreed. She made calls, coordinated with officers at our house. Within an hour, she returned with photographs. The attic in all its horror. The mattress and sleeping bag. The bucket, still containing evidence of use. The tally marks on the wall documenting 171 days of imprisonment. The newspaper clippings scattered around. The food wrappers and empty water bottles. The small window with its mesh covering. Every degrading detail photographed from multiple angles. This is more than enough, Detective Wallace said. We're issuing arrest warrants for both your parents. Charges will include unlawful imprisonment, child endangerment, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. She paused. They're at a wedding in Philadelphia. We've contacted Philadelphia police. They'll be arrested there and extradited back to Maryland. The news coverage started immediately. Local stations picked up the story. Teen found after months in attic prison. The articles detailed everything: the study abroad lie, the attic conditions, my physical state. Mrs. Nguyen was interviewed, crying while explaining she'd tried to reach me for months, had been worried but trusted my parents when they said I was fine. The exchange program director was interviewed, explaining they'd never received my enrollment paperwork, that my parents had forged withdrawal documents. The school district faced intense criticism for not verifying my location more thoroughly. How had a student supposedly studying abroad gone months without any academic verification? Why hadn't teachers or administrators pushed harder when I didn't respond to messages? The principal issued a statement promising policy changes. Reporters camped outside our house, filming the attic window, interviewing neighbors. The Kowalski family expressed shock. Mrs. Chen gave emotional interviews about finding me, about the months I'd been suffering 15 feet above where she'd worked in her garden. My parents were arrested at the Philadelphia hotel, brought back to Maryland in handcuffs. The perp walk was televised, both of them looking smaller and older, avoiding cameras. Their arraignment happened the next day. They pleaded not guilty, were released on bail with conditions prohibiting contact with me or Sophia. Their lawyer issued a statement claiming they'd acted out of misguided parental concern, that they'd never intended harm, that the situation had gotten out of control. The statement was nonsense. You don't accidentally install a lock and imprison your child for nearly 6 months. That requires deliberate, ongoing choice. Sophia's case exploded in complexity. Her lawyer immediately filed motions. The new information about my imprisonment supported her claim that the family was willing to do anything to protect her. If they'd locked me in an attic, perhaps her accusations about being framed weren't as far-fetched as prosecutors claimed. The DA's office fought back, arguing that my imprisonment actually proved the family's willingness to obstruct justice, which implicated Sophia further. I spent 3 weeks in the hospital. The medical team treated me like a trauma case, which I suppose I was. Physical therapy to rebuild muscle, nutritional support to address deficiencies, psychiatric evaluation to assess mental state. The therapist assigned to me specialized in abuse cases. Dr. Michelle Reeves had kind eyes and infinite patience for my fractured explanations. She helped me understand that my imprisonment would have lasting effects, that trauma didn't end when the door opened, that I'd need long-term support to process what had happened. Child Protective Services removed me from my parents' custody immediately. I was assigned a caseworker named Jerome Banks who worked to find appropriate placement. The challenge was finding a foster family willing to take a 17-year-old with significant trauma. Most foster parents preferred younger children or had concerns about my mental state. I spent those weeks in the hospital living in limbo, discharged from medical care but with nowhere to go. Mrs. Nguyen solved the problem. My art teacher, who'd written those recommendation letters for my exchange program, who'd tried for months to reach me, showed up at the hospital one day with a proposal. She'd gone through emergency foster parent certification specifically to take me in. "You're not going to some stranger's house," she said firmly. "You're coming home with me. We'll figure out everything else as we go." Jerome approved the placement immediately. Mrs. Nguyen had a spotless background, stable income, and genuine connection to me. On a cold December morning, I left the hospital with Mrs. Nguyen, moved into her spare bedroom that she'd prepared specifically for me. The room was small but mine, filled with art supplies she'd bought. Watercolors, acrylics, canvases, sketchbooks. "I thought you might want to paint," she said. "Art therapy, processing through creation." I cried when I saw it all, overwhelmed by kindness after months of cruelty. The holidays approached, my first freedom in 6 months. Mrs. Nguyen made Thanksgiving dinner, invited her sister's family, created normalcy I'd forgotten existed. I helped cook, setting the table, participating in regular family activities. Everything felt surreal. Using a real bathroom, eating at a table, walking outside whenever I wanted. Simple freedoms I'd taken for granted became precious. At night, I struggled with insomnia and nightmares. Would wake convinced I was back in the attic. Would panic until I oriented myself to Mrs. Nguyen's guest room. The trauma persisted despite physical freedom. Dr. Reeves explained this was normal, that my brain needed time to accept safety. We worked on coping strategies, grounding techniques for when the past felt more real than the present. The legal proceedings dragged into winter. Sophia's trial was scheduled for February. My parents' trial would follow in March. I'd have to testify at both, tell courtrooms full of strangers about the attic and the bucket and the months of isolation. Sophia's trial came first. I sat in the witness box looking at my twin sister across the courtroom. She looked older, harder, her face holding none of the softness from our childhood. The prosecution asked me detailed questions about the crimes, about what I knew and when. I explained I'd known nothing, that I'd been at school with witnesses during the jewelry store robbery, that I'd never participated in any criminal activity. that the security footage showing someone who looked like me was actually Sophia, identifiable by the silver charm bracelet visible in the images. Sophia's lawyer cross-examined aggressively. Isn't it true you and your sister frequently impersonated each other? Yes. Isn't it possible you committed these crimes and framed your sister? No. Isn't it convenient that you claim to have been imprisoned right when police started investigating? I met his eyes. There's nothing convenient about 171 days in an attic. Ask to see the photographs. Ask to see my medical records. Ask to see the tally marks I carved into the wall. The jury deliberated for 3 days before convicting Sophia on all 12 counts. The evidence against her was overwhelming despite her defense attorney's attempts to create reasonable doubt. DNA, fingerprints, security footage, testimony from accomplices who'd already taken plea deals. She received 5 years in prison with possibility of parole after 3. When the verdict was read, she looked at me across the courtroom with pure hatred, as if I'd caused this, as if her imprisonment was my fault rather than the consequence of her own choices. My parents' trial was more emotionally difficult. I had to testify about the imprisonment itself, walking the jury through each degrading detail: the bucket system, the heat, the isolation, the systematic erasure of my identity and future. The defense tried to paint them as scared parents who'd made a terrible mistake under pressure. The prosecution presented them as calculating criminals who'd imprisoned one child to protect another. The evidence spoke for itself: the installed deadbolt, the mesh covering on the window, the prepared supplies. This wasn't a panicked decision. It was premeditated imprisonment. The jury convicted both parents on all counts. Sentencing happened 2 weeks later. The judge was a woman in her 60s who'd read every word of testimony and evidence. Her statement before sentencing was scathing. You were entrusted with the care and protection of your daughter. Instead, you chose to imprison her in subhuman conditions for nearly 6 months. You stole her educational opportunity, her social connections, her dignity. You did this deliberately and systematically to protect your other daughter from consequences of her own criminal behavior. This represents a betrayal of the most fundamental duty parents have. No sentence can restore what you took from Ainsley, but I can ensure you face meaningful consequences. My father received 10 years. My mother received 8. The courtroom gasped at the length. Their lawyer immediately filed notice of appeal. I felt nothing watching them led away in handcuffs. The sentences felt both too harsh and too lenient. Too harsh because they were still my parents, people I'd loved for 16 years before everything changed. Too lenient because 10 and 8 years didn't balance 171 days in an attic, didn't restore my exchange program opportunity, didn't give me back my junior year. I lived with Mrs. Nguyen through the remainder of my junior year and all of senior year. She legally fostered me until I turned 18, providing stability I desperately needed. The school district offered to re-enroll me in junior year, letting me repeat the year I'd missed. But I was already behind academically and socially. Mrs. Nguyen suggested GED instead, taking the equivalency test and moving forward rather than going backward. I studied independently, took the test, passed easily. The academic knowledge hadn't disappeared during my imprisonment. With the GED completed, Mrs. Nguyen helped me apply to colleges. The challenge was explaining the gap in my education, the missing semester, the reason I wasn't following a traditional path. We were honest in applications, explained the imprisonment, the trial, the recovery. Some schools rejected me outright. Others expressed concern about my ability to handle college stress after trauma. But a few institutions understood and saw potential. The Art Institute in Chicago accepted me with full scholarship, housing assistance, and counseling support. They'd followed my case in news coverage, had reached out offering admission specifically because they believed art could be part of healing. I accepted immediately, grateful for the opportunity to start over somewhere new. Mrs. Nguyen helped me move in August, driving me to Chicago, setting up my dorm room, meeting my roommate. She cried when she left, worried about me being so far from her support. But I needed the distance, needed to be somewhere without constant reminders of the attic and the trials. Chicago represented possibility, a future I could build rather than a past I had to escape. College was its own challenge. The freedom was overwhelming after imprisonment followed by the structured support of Mrs. Nguyen's home. I struggled with basic decisions: which classes to take, whether to join clubs, how to interact with people who didn't know my history. My roommate knew vaguely that I'd had a difficult family situation but didn't know details. I kept it that way, wanting to be known for who I was becoming rather than what had happened to me. The art became my therapy and my voice. I painted large canvases exploring confinement and freedom, attics and open spaces, locks and broken doors. My work was raw, emotional, sometimes disturbing, but it resonated. My professors encouraged me to exhibit, to share these pieces publicly. My first student show was titled 171 Days, featuring paintings created during that first semester. The centerpiece was a massive canvas showing an attic window from the inside, tally marks covering every visible surface. The painting sold within hours of the show opening, purchased by a child advocacy organization for $20,000, more money than I'd ever seen. The buyer explained it would hang in their offices as a reminder of why their work mattered, why they fought to protect children from abuse. Other paintings sold too, smaller works but meaningful prices. I used the money to establish my independence, moving off campus sophomore year, reducing financial dependence on scholarships and Mrs. Nguyen's help. Therapy continued through college. The school's counseling services connected me with Dr. Amanda Cho, a trauma specialist who worked with abuse survivors. We spent 2 years unpacking the imprisonment, examining the psychological damage, rebuilding my sense of self and safety. The work was painful but necessary. Dr. Cho helped me understand that the attic still lived in my mind even though I'd physically escaped. That trauma creates mental prisons that take years to dismantle. We worked on flashbacks, panic attacks, the hypervigilance that made me constantly scan rooms for exits. Gradually, the psychological symptoms eased, not disappeared, but became manageable. I learned coping mechanisms, grounding techniques, ways to distinguish past from present when memories overwhelmed current reality. The improvement was incremental but real, measured in small victories. Being able to ride elevators without panic, sleeping through the night, trusting new people with fragments of my story. Junior year, I started volunteering with a youth crisis hotline, using my experience to help teenagers in crisis situations. The training was extensive, teaching us to listen without judgment, to provide resources without directing. The work felt meaningful, transforming the worst experience of my life into something that could help others. The calls ranged from minor to devastating. Kids experiencing family conflict, abuse, homelessness, suicidal ideation. I couldn't save everyone, couldn't fix systematic problems with phone conversations, but I could listen, could validate, could provide information about resources available. One call particularly stood out. A 16-year-old girl named Melissa called saying her family was keeping her home from school as punishment for her sister's crimes. She was too scared to provide details, but the parallels to my own situation were obvious. I followed protocol, gathered enough information for our supervisor to file a report with authorities, kept Melissa on the line until she felt safe enough to end the call. 2 weeks later, our supervisor told me the report had resulted in a welfare check. The girl was removed from the home. Her parents were under investigation. One call had potentially saved someone from months or years of what I'd experienced. Senior year, I changed my major from general art to art therapy, deciding to formalize what I'd been doing informally through my work and volunteering. Art therapy combined psychology with creative expression, helping people process trauma through creation. It felt like the perfect fusion of my experiences and skills. The program required additional coursework in psychology, counseling techniques, and therapeutic practices, required internships at mental health facilities and community centers. The work was demanding but meaningful, every class connecting to my broader purpose. I graduated with honors, received multiple job offers from nonprofits and therapy centers, chose an organization working with incarcerated youth, helping teenagers in juvenile detention process their circumstances through art. The irony wasn't lost on me. My parents were in prison, my sister was in prison, and I was choosing to work inside prisons. But incarcerated youth needed support and understanding, needed someone who knew what confinement did to mental health. I was 22 when Sophia was released on parole after serving 3 years. She tried to contact me immediately, letters addressed to my last known address forwarded through Mrs. Nguyen. I burned them without opening. Whatever Sophia wanted to say, I didn't need to hear it. She'd let me take punishment for her crimes, had lived her life while I suffered in the attic, had shown no remorse during trial. Her apologies, if that's what the letters contained, came too late from someone I no longer recognized as family. My parents sent letters too from prison, arriving monthly with institutional postmarks. They attempted explanations, apologies, justifications. I read the first few before realizing they were all variations of the same theme. They'd done what they thought was necessary. They'd been protecting Sophia. They'd made mistakes but came from a place of love. The letters made me angry rather than forgiving. What they'd done wasn't love. It was choosing one child over another, valuing Sophia's freedom more than my humanity. I stopped reading the letters, just filed them away unopened. Maybe someday I'd be ready to read them. Not yet. I established my own art therapy practice at 25, focusing on trauma survivors and abuse cases. Word spread in the therapeutic community about my background and approach. Clients came specifically because I understood imprisonment, both physical and psychological. My office walls displayed some of my earlier paintings, the ones exploring confinement and freedom. Clients would comment on them, often opening conversations about their own experiences. The art became bridge between us, visual representation that I understood their pain. One client particularly impacted me. A 17-year-old girl named Claire who'd been kept locked in her home by her grandmother after her parents died. Different circumstances than mine, but similar isolation and erasure. We worked together for 8 months, using art to help her process the trauma, rebuild her identity, imagine a future beyond what had happened. She created powerful self-portraits documenting her recovery, visual diary of healing. Watching her progress reminded me that survival wasn't just about escaping physical imprisonment. It was about reclaiming the self that captivity tried to destroy. At 27, I was invited to speak at a national conference on child abuse and neglect. The organization wanted me to discuss my experience and subsequent work. I accepted, despite anxiety about public speaking. The keynote address to 300 professionals working in child protection. I walked through my imprisonment chronologically, from the day my parents locked the attic door to my escape to the legal proceedings to my recovery and career choice. Emphasized that abuse often happens in plain sight, in suburban homes that look normal from outside. That systems fail when they don't verify, when they accept simple explanations for complex situations. My school had failed by not confirming my study abroad location. My neighbors had failed by not looking up when I pressed my face against the attic window. Society fails when we assume families are safe and parents always act in children's best interests. The response was overwhelming. People crying, standing ovation, dozens wanting to discuss implementing better verification systems. Now at 30, I run a nonprofit providing art therapy specifically for survivors of imprisonment and captivity. Working with people who've experienced everything from human trafficking to religious cult confinement to domestic captivity. Each story is unique, but the psychological impact is remarkably similar. The loss of autonomy, the erasure of identity, the difficulty rebuilding trust and safety. We use art to externalize trauma, to create narratives that make sense of senseless situations, to imagine futures beyond past experiences. The organization has helped over 300 survivors in 5 years, has partnered with law enforcement to provide services to people rescued from captivity situations, has trained other therapists in trauma-informed art therapy approaches. The work is exhausting and rewarding in equal measure. My parents are eligible for parole in 3 years. Whether they'll be released is uncertain. Their appeals were denied at every level. They've served 9 years of their sentences, by all accounts are model prisoners. The parole board will consider their behavior, remorse demonstrated, plans for reentry. I've been contacted to provide victim impact statements when their hearings occur. I'm still deciding whether I'll participate, whether I want to face them across a parole board table, or whether I prefer to let their sentence play out without my input. Sophia has rebuilt her life in apparent normalcy. She lives in another state, works in retail, has no contact with me. I see occasional social media posts through mutual connections, photos suggesting she's moved past her crimes without meaningful reflection. Some people don't change, don't develop the self-awareness necessary for genuine transformation. I've accepted that Sophia is one of those people. My twin sister in biology only, a stranger sharing my genetics but none of my values or growth. I'm not angry anymore, just indifferent. She made choices that hurt people. She's living with those consequences. That story is separate from mine now. I still paint. Not therapy paintings anymore, but personal work exploring themes beyond trauma. Recently, I've been creating pieces about joy, freedom, possibility. Bright colors replacing the dark palettes of my early work. Evolution from documenting pain to celebrating survival. These new paintings sell well, are exhibited in galleries, represent who I'm becoming rather than what happened to me. The attic still appears in my dreams occasionally. Wake up convinced I'm back there, feeling walls closing in, unable to breathe. But the episodes are less frequent now, manageable through grounding techniques Dr. Cho taught me years ago. The trauma left permanent marks, changed my neurochemistry in ways I'll always carry. But it doesn't define me anymore, doesn't prevent me from living fully. I've built a life I chose, work I find meaningful, relationships based on mutual respect rather than family obligation. Some days I still think about that girl packing for France, excited about an exchange program she'd worked toward for years. Mourning everything changed, when parents chose imprisonment over honesty. I mourn that lost opportunity, the experiences I never had, the person I might have become without trauma. But I've also learned that who I became in response to that trauma has value and purpose. The work I do, the people I help, the advocacy I provide, none of that exists without having survived the attic. I transformed imprisonment into mission, turned the worst thing that happened to me into the reason I wake up fighting for others. That's not redemption or silver lining. It's survival taking radical form, refusing to let cruelty have the final word. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.